Hey there, folks. I'm back after about 2 weeks in Nashville again, working on this Missy Raines and Allegheny record, which is so close to being finished. There's one track left to go. I'm going to go back in January and record that. There's a bunch of really great guests. This has been a super fun process. Also, Alison Brown has been producing the record, which is super cool, but a little intimidating to have Alison Brown listen to you play banjo. But either way, it's been super fun nonetheless. But I thought I'd ease back into making these videos with a little Q&A. I put out a little question and answer Instagram story and just said, go ahead and ask some banjo questions and they will be answered in a YouTube video. So this is that YouTube video. I've got a whole big long list of these things to get to. We'll see if I can get all of them. Okay, here we go. From G585MCA, we have the question, what is the best pickup / preamp to gain natural / acoustic sound when plugged in? I have no idea. I actually really don't plug in at all. And there was a couple questions about plugging in or live sound stuff, and I'll answer that by saying I really don't know. I don't plug in at all. I have in the past. I think I had an EMG pickup at one point and never really dialed in a sound that I liked. It was just for a very specific use, and then I moved on. So unfortunately, not a good person to ask, but maybe sometime in the future, I'll let you know if I go down that road and how I figure out how to get some decent tone with that. We'll see. Elizabeth Emery asks, I play by ear, so what's your advice to better understand fretboard knowledge, like the scales and stuff? Okay, so if you're playing by ear, you totally don't need to stop playing by ear, but it can be really helpful to understand music theory. So I've got a couple music theory lessons out there, and if you watch those, you're going to understand three really important things, which are the names of the notes and where they are on the fretboard, how major scales are constructed, and then how you know what chords are in each key. Those three things are probably most of what you need to know in terms of music theory. Then you're going to have words to describe everything that you're doing. So when you hear something or you learn something by ear, you can just tell what key it's in, or you can tell what scale they're using to improvise or play a certain solo, or where to find certain notes on the fretboard, all of that stuff. So watch those three videos, or just really any music theory stuff to figure out the names of notes, major scales, also minor scales, and just how you know which chords are in each key. Off to a great start, already not answering these in one sentence, but we'll keep trying. How to control your face expression and posture when playing for YouTube videos, from Alexi. I don't really think about it too much. I just try to stay relaxed, and I guess if I'm making too many facial expressions or moving around too much, sometimes that's because I'm too tense, but if I can try to relax a little bit more and just focus on what I'm playing, then nothing seems to happen. But I think I naturally don't really have much facial expression or movement. People tend to say I look really laid back when I'm playing banjo, which I wouldn't say is necessarily the case. I think I just look laid back. Megan Wright says, dying to see some more beginner tutorials. Those are on the way. I haven't done those in a while. I don't do those super often, but those are on the way. Okay, Chris Cap Music says, I'm torn between a 93 Earl Scruggs Gibson, post Greg Rich, or Rich and Taylor Classic. I haven't played either of those banjos. I've played a couple Earl Scruggs model Gibsons and a couple Rich and Taylors, but neither of those specific ones. So I am not sure. As long as you're able to play both of them, then hopefully just go with the one that sounds better. If you're not able to play both of them, I have no idea. All right, then from Matt Brown's Dream, we have, what is your camera mic setup for your awesome videos? So I've got a couple different cameras and microphones that I use for different reasons. This one is the Sony a7S III, which I'm pretty fond of and use all the time with this Rode onboard microphone for like traveling and vlogging type stuff. And then the one that you are seeing right now, you can see me filming myself, is the Sony FX3, which has some different features, but the image is exactly the same as the a7S III, so I can use them both for kind of a two-camera setup, and the image will be the same. And then mic-wise, right now what I'm using is this Sennheiser MKE 600, which I like, and then I put that over myself with this big gigantic light, but I can plug that directly into FX3. That's one of the features that I really like about it, is that it has an XLR input. So if you're interested in a kind of rundown of all that gear, I can make a separate video about that, but that's for a longer video. That would take a little more time to explain. Moving on, another question from MLG Ham is Dream Banjo. It's kind of a tough one. The easy answer is a pre-war original flathead Gibson banjo, which just means that it has the original tone ring that was made pre-World War II with the banjo it was made for. They just sound truly amazing. They're incredibly expensive. you're going to spend at least $40,000 or something like that. So who knows if I'll ever even end up with one of those. But having played enough of them compared to a bunch of other really great banjos, there is absolutely a difference. I don't know if there's tens of thousands of dollars of a difference, but you only live once. So if you can get a little bit extra tone, it might be worth it. We'll see where that goes down the road. Okay, now here is a banjo question from Moritz Angle. How's it going, Moritz? How can I play double thumb at fast tempos? If you're not familiar with what the concept of double thumb is, it will not shock you to know that double thumb means that you're playing with your thumb twice in a row. And there's a bunch of really cool Scruggs, J.E. Crow, all kinds of players' licks where it makes more sense if you're going to play the same note on the same string to use your thumb twice. And there are actually times when you do the same with your index or middle finger, but double thumb is pretty common. So that would be a lick like... that kind of thing. How do you do that faster? I don't think it's anything different from playing faster in general. And that was also one of the questions was, how do I play faster? How do I get to play faster? And the key is to play slowly, as far as I'm concerned, with a metronome and increasing the tempo gradually as you go. If you can keep your thumb relaxed, especially during that double thumb moment, then it'll be all good. If you keep tension during that moment, then it's actually harder to move your thumb, especially at a faster speed. So it's just going to make your life more challenging. So if you can keep that relaxed enough that you can move it and then use enough force that you get a good sound, that's the key. Easier said than done, but slowly, metronome, gradually increase the speed and be prepared for it to take a really, really, really long time. Like until it sounds good, years maybe, but that's the challenge. That's what we're doing. All right, and from Green Moon 632, thoughts on noobs playing non-banjo songs on banjo. You can play any song on any instrument, provided it has, enough notes on it. We all play the same 12 notes in Western music, so I assume that's what you're talking about. So learn basic chords on the banjo, and then you can either learn by ear or look up what chords are in that song, and you just combine those two things. The same bluegrass patterns that I might be teaching might not work great on those songs necessarily, but it might be an okay place to start, so give that a try. Now a question from Gonk. How often should I change the strings on a banjo, and how do I know when to change them? So there were a couple string-related questions. Maybe I'll try to get them all out of the way, but let me grab the strings I use, because that was another question. So to answer all string questions, this is the set of strings that I use. They're the J.D. Crow signature set, the studio set, which is slightly different than the stage set, but that's what I use. I would suggest if you are looking for what strings to use, start with some lighter ones to begin with. They don't necessarily have to be a certain brand, but something that's like gauges 9, 11, 12, 20, 9. The two 9s could be a 9.5 or a 10, but otherwise that's a pretty good place to start. That's relatively light as far as thing goes. But then you can start moving up if you want to. I prefer lighter gauge strings. A lot of players do, but someone like Sonny Osborne used much heavier strings, and then other people that try to get the sound of Sonny Osborne might use heavier strings, so something to look into, but start lighter to begin with, and your life will be a little easier. As far as changing strings, I change them pretty often, like at least once a week, definitely for each gig that I play, definitely for each video that I film, and if I'm practicing a lot, then it might be every couple of days, which might be way more than you need to, but just if it starts to not really sound quite as fresh as you want it to, maybe it's time. I wouldn't be afraid to change strings frequently. It just depends on how much you want to spend on strings. But I will also mention that some people really like the sound of more used strings. Some people don't change them for months and prefer that sound, or they personally get a better sound from that. So that's totally something to think about as well. It's just about the sound. If it starts to get, you can see discoloration on the strings and all that stuff, maybe it's time to change them. But primarily just go by the sound and what you like. Okay, another question here. Complete beginner here, just started following your lessons. How do you place your left hand? Well, that is a little complicated because it kind of depends on your hand, but in general, some good rules of thumb is that you want to be able to curl your fingers enough that you're not blocking any of the other strings. For instance, I can play this note, but it's not going to block this note. If I'm not curling my fingers enough or have the right angle, then it's going to be... then it'll be muted. You don't want that. The other thing is keeping your wrist relatively straight. Some people will play like this, and that is just going to be a huge problem for your wrist. It's also going to make it harder to play. It'll be easier to play if you can curl your fingers more and keep your wrist straight. So in general, I'm trying to be kind of like this as I hold my hand on it. Now the thumb, some people have their thumb over the neck. I will kind of do that, and then some people will have it on the back. Probably the most ergonomic thing is to keep it on the back of the neck, but I don't know. I don't have the best left-hand position necessarily, but I get by. All right, here's one from Mac Forbes. Do I have to anchor my picking hand with my ring/pinky finger? I find I can play better if I don't. Well, you don't have to do anything. It's totally up to you. Whatever you like to do to make the music you want to make is great. However, pretty much every banjo player has found that in the long run, it's actually easier to play with 1 or 2 fingers planted on the head. Not all the time, not at every single moment necessarily. Sometimes it might come off the head, something like that. But in general, most of the time, it does make things easier. At first, it's way harder because it's something your hand's not used to. Your hand is used to being somewhat unconstrained. But in general, it's going to give you a lot of stability. And it does help with tone in ways that I can't really describe necessarily. Partially it's the stability, but just contact with the head, it's gonna help. Now, again, if you want to do things differently and live your own life, that's great. I specifically play within the bluegrass genre, which kind of has a language of both the way people play and the way people sound, and I like that sound. So I do things that help me get that sound. If you don't care about that sound, or the sound that people make with their hands planted on the banjo, it might not be that important to you. So that's something you've got to really think about for yourself. But if you like the sound of banjo players that you've heard before who plant their hand on the head of the banjo, it's probably a good idea to do that. It's going to be really hard to emulate that sound or play in those styles without doing that. So probably yes, but not necessarily. All right, now from Leah Loves Bugs. How long have you been playing the banjo for? Coming up on 11 years. I started when I was 20 and I'm 31 now, so getting close to 11 full years of playing the banjo. George Guthrie, great banjo player, asks, best conversion banjo tone ring. So if you don't know, the tone ring is the piece of metal. It's a big ring that goes around the banjo on top of the rim, if you can see what I'm pointing to here, which isn't part of all banjos, but it is part of a lot of banjos, and it's a big part of the sound of the banjo, and frequently banjo makers will make all the different parts of the banjo, and the tone ring is one that people will swap out, specifically coveting those original pre-war Gibson tone rings. To me, the best ones are Sloan and Blaylock, but there are a lot of really great ones. I just happen to have played a bunch of banjos that I really like that had those. Caveat being, I haven't played those banjos with a bunch of different rings to compare the differences necessarily. I just happen to have really enjoyed banjos that had those tone rings in them. So that might be worth something, but I'm not the most knowledgeable in that field, just something. But all my banjos do have Sloan and Blaylock tone rings, with the exception of the Huber banjo, which has a Huber tone ring, unsurprisingly. Okay, Zach Carnitas says, does picking style define type of music? Not necessarily, but in general, if you're going to play 3-finger in the Scruggs style, it's going to sound probably pretty bluegrassy. If you're going to play claw hammer, it's going to sound kind of old-timey, kind of in the vein of old-time music. But those are just guidelines. It doesn't necessarily mean that. But if you're going to play exclusively claw hammer, you're not going to fit in with most bluegrass bands. And if you play exclusively 3-finger, it's going to be slightly unconventional for a lot of old-time bands. Although there are definitely exceptions to that. So it's up to you, really. It's getting a little bright, so I'm going to have to change locations in a second. But Ethan's Tiawan, fantastic mandolin player, resident of Maine, asks, how do mash? Okay, now Lessons with Marcel, never heard of him, asks, subscribe to Lessons with Marcel. Anyway, got a couple questions from Rascal1456. What was the hardest part about learning the banjo, and how did you overcome it? I've not overcome this, but the hardest thing is still playing in time. Having good timing that sounds musical is always the biggest challenge as far as I'm concerned, and I work on that every day by playing with metronome, playing with other records, and hopefully playing with people. So I'll work on that for the rest of my life, but that is, to me, the biggest challenge. Second question, how do you recommend somebody learn to get better if they don't have a teacher reasonably close? You have to find resources like records that you can listen to, or YouTube videos or books to practice the things that you learn, and then you have to record yourself and see how it sounds. And you have to really think critically about what it sounds like and make changes. So if you don't like the way it sounds, you have to change something and see what effect that has on the way it sounds. But you can also find teachers on Zoom online, Zoom, Skype, something like that, and that can be really helpful as well. Related question from my Magic Bus 142. Any way I can do online class with you, which I assume means like a Zoom lesson or a Skype lesson, which unfortunately answer to that right now is no. I enjoy doing that sort of thing, but the truth is I don't really have a ton of time for it. I like making these videos. I play with the band Missy Rains in Allegheny, and I like to practice a lot. And the truth is, after all of that, I don't have a ton of time left over. 1, 2, I'm not organized enough to do that. If you've taken lessons with me in the past, it is probably true that I have missed a lesson or have rescheduled lessons, all that stuff. If that was a regular part of my schedule, it would become a mess really quickly, and it's just not something that works for me. Maybe sometime in the future, but right now, unfortunately, no, and that's for everyone's benefit. Cam Lane asks, any banjo tunes you ever get tired of hearing played in a jam or live? Not really. I kind of like everything. I don't really get tired of things or I think things are overplayed when it comes to like 9 Pound Hammer or Blue Ridge Cabin Home or any of that stuff. It's all good. But I don't know if I love the tune Red Haired Boy. It's a fiddle tune in the key of A. I think it's fine. For some reason, I don't think I would ever be the one to say, hey, let's play Red Haired Boy. If it's going to come up, I'll play it. I don't have any problems with it. I don't think about it. But it's just not my favorite. But that's as close as I get because I pretty much like everything. Okay, 2 things are happening, which is I'm about to be blinded, and also I'm running out of memory on this memory card. So we're going to fix those things and find a new location and begin again because we are about halfway done. So, by the way, that is one of my cats, Jane, who you might remember from my most recent video about a Sonny Osborne lick, or before that, she was in 30 Days of Banjo, day 10, and maybe day 11 as well, or her first appearance, which was in a video of the Don Reno tune, Hen Scratch and Stomp, I believe. So everyone, welcome Jane back to the channel. Anyway, continuing, we've got a question from Benny French. Nice to hear from you, Ben. Advice for having a career in music: classes, practice, experience, backup plan. So if you want to have a career in music, meaning that you make a living playing music, then you want to be the best musician you possibly can be, which means practice a lot and get as much experience playing with other people as possible. It will never hurt you to be a better musician. You also want to get along well with people. So if you find yourself in situations where you're constantly having trouble working with other people, you might want to think about whether or not that's because of them or because of you. Either way, if you want it to work, you're usually going to have to be the one that makes things okay. Not everybody's going to be easy to work with, but you can always make sure that you're easy to work with. In terms of actually making money, consider that not everyone who's making a living from music does so by selling music that they've recorded, meaning their own albums, or performing their own music. Very few people actually make a living doing that, which isn't the worst thing in the world. It's just the way it is. A lot of people make money playing other people's music, recording other people's music, and teaching other people how to play music, all of which are cool things to do. But if your identity is wrapped up in the idea that it's your creative output and that's what's valuable, and therefore you should be paid for that, that might be challenging for you. For me, I just want to do whatever it takes to maximize the amount of time I spend doing the things I like playing music, practicing, being with family, or Jane, my cat, or Sal, my other cat. But to do that, I don't necessarily always need to be paid to make my own music. There have been times that I've done things that weren't actually music related, but paid well enough that I had more time to spend time making music. So I did that instead. It's not super important to me that I get money for art necessarily, but it is important to me that I have the time to do that. So just do the math for yourself on what's going to maximize the time that you can spend making art, making music, enjoying art and music, and all those things. And consider that it might not necessarily be getting paid for that art. Okay, one from Finn Harkins 33. Any good left hand exercises? I don't really do exercises necessarily, maybe right hand roll patterns a little bit, but I mostly just practice tunes and different solos I've learned and stuff. I'll use that as an exercise. But one thing you can try is put each of these 4 fingers on one fret, 5, 6, 7, 8, and you're just going to play up the strings with that pattern. On the right hand, you can do that with your picks on single string, whatever it is you want to do, you know, thumb, index, thumb, index. But what you're doing basically is isolating each finger, having them move independently. So you do that 1, 2, 3, 4. You can do that 4, 3, 2, 1. You can do that 1, 3, 2, 4, 4, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 4, 4, 1, 3, 2. A bunch of different combinations, all of which are a little bit challenging to move each finger independently. So I haven't done that in a really long time as a regular part of my practice, but I would guess that it had some hand in me being able to get around the fretboard with whatever amount of facility that I have. So it's worth thinking about, but I wouldn't prioritize that necessarily too much over more musical examples like actual tunes or licks that you'll find that might be challenging on the left hand, and you can just practice that, and then you've got a piece of music to work on after that. So something to think about. Okay, Tyler Nelson asks, how do you keep your pinky from hurting after a long playing session? Try to stay as relaxed as possible while still using enough muscle to get done what you need to get done, but also take a break if it starts to hurt after a while. All right, now Chris Luquette, certified guitar owner, big sports fan, asks, why aren't the rolls easier? It's a really easy question. If they were any easier, they wouldn't be so hard. Okay, and Kate Prasher asks, why are drums and banjo such a killer combo? You know, not many people know how killer a combo drums and banjo are, but it really is. There are people that say no drums and bluegrass. Not that we're necessarily talking about bluegrass, but there are people that say that. And actually, drums and bluegrass is really cool. If you check out a really cool documentary called Bluegrass Country Soul, there are a bunch of supposed traditional bluegrass bands like the Osborne Brothers, Jimmy Martin, all using drummers, and they're all plugged in playing electric, and it sounds so cool. I think the combo works really well because the train beat of the snare drum lines up really well with the roll with the banjo player, ideally, if it works out that way. In fact, I don't know who told me this, but I once heard that when J.D. Crowe had a drummer in his band, he once had to tell a sound engineer that the monitors had to be loud enough for the drummers to hear him playing, not the other way around. So non sequitur, but kind of funny nonetheless. Okay, from Coat Collection, what was your first banjo? It was a Gold Tone BG 150, perhaps, which I guess means Bluegrass 150, and it was fine. It could have been a lot worse, and it didn't cost too much, and I used it for about a year and a half, so I would say a pretty decent purchase at the time. Okay, and from Banjo Gabby, tips for playing mash on banjo. Now, if you don't know, mash is like an adjective to describe a certain type of bluegrass, which is usually kind of medium tempo, kind of minor, modal, somewhat aggressive. It's actually really hard to pin down exactly what it is, and that's worth a video of its own. So if that's very confusing to you, don't even worry about it. But if you know what I'm talking about, I would start maybe, at least with the videos that I've put out so far, I would start by checking out the way that Ron Stewart plays Clinch Mountain Backstep, which you can find on my YouTube channel. So I would start there. A lot of that material is a lot of the stuff that's going to be used in that style of banjo playing. IJB, I think, asks, which chord did you find the most difficult to learn and how did you end up learning it? I played guitar for about 10 years before playing banjo, so by the time I got to banjo, stringed instruments weren't super challenging to figure out, how to play a chord or something like that. But I will say that the D chord shape, like this, can be a little challenging at first to get everything where it's supposed to be and then be moving around. So if you're just trying to land there, even that would kind of give you some trouble because there's not really a similar guitar shape exactly that looks like that. So that was a little unfamiliar. And in terms of how I learned how to play it, kind of the same as I've really ever done anything else, which is start really, really slow. Basically just put one finger on at a time, get it in the right place, and try to memorize exactly where that's supposed to go. And then take my hand off the chord and then put it back. And that's practicing. You're just making the shape of the chord over and over again, and then throwing it away, and then making the shape again. And it takes a long time, but eventually you get it, and then the chord's no problem. All right, here's another one. I feel like I've hit a plateau in my banjo learning. How do I break through to the next level? Just learn anything new. Don't think about it too much. It doesn't have to be just the right thing, but learn a new tune or a new chord shape or a new lick, new scale, anything. And either you're going to be kind of inspired to go in a certain direction because you'll be playing something and it'll move you to try something new, or you'll hit kind of a roadblock and you'll have to really struggle with something, and that'll be the moment when you actually learn something new. So don't worry about what it is too much. Just pick something and start learning it. All right, now QDextos asks, what are the weirdest styles of music you've played on banjo? And I don't think I've really played too much outside of bluegrass on the banjo per se. Maybe some jazz here or there, which is kind of weird, I guess. But when I got married, we did have a Acadian band play, which was super cool, and I sat in with them for a while. And that actually works really well with the banjo. There's nothing weird about it, but it was certainly not something I had put on my list to play at the time, but that was super fun. All right, Meggy Weggy asks, any tips for keeping your intonation sounding good? Yes. So intonation, meaning the idea that your banjo is in tune across the neck, not just the open strings. The way you can check that is by playing a fretted note at the 12th fret, for instance, the first string D, and then the harmonic at the 12th fret. And in theory, those should be the same pitch. If the fretted note is a little sharper than the harmonic, then you need to move the bridge. You can slide it backwards towards the tailpiece. If the fretted note is flat, then you need to move the bridge towards the neck this way. The challenge is that you're not going to necessarily move the entire bridge. It's more like changing the angle of the bridge. So you'll have to kind of mess with that, but that's the general mechanism. You just check all of those with the fretted notes and then adjust the bridge accordingly. So give that a try. The actual Brody asks, opinions on Ibanez B300. I just bought one. I think it's great. I've never played one. Unfortunately, I have no opinion. Shrine of Earl Scruggs asks, how should I practice the banjo? Early and often. Shrine of Earl Scruggs also says, tell me about your pre-war Gibson. Well, in a way, I technically have 4 pre-war Gibson banjos, but in another way, none of those are actually completely original pre-war Gibson banjos. They have all sorts of other parts. So in another way, I have 0 pre-war Gibson banjos. I actually have a video about this in the works, so I'm not going to exactly answer that question now, but rest assured it will be answered in a video very soon. Okay, Katie wants to know best newer bands with banjo in them. So my guess is this question is not specifically about bluegrass bands, more like other styles of bands that just happen to have banjo in them, as opposed to bluegrass bands, which pretty much always have banjo in them. Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of info on those other bands because I just listen to so much bluegrass, and the music that I do listen to that isn't bluegrass doesn't tend to have banjo in it. So not a great resource on that. A couple of years ago, when, Avett Brothers were the new band or something, I would just say them because that's a great band, but not exactly a new band per se. But if we are talking about newer bluegrass bands, everybody knows about Billy Strings doing really cool stuff. There's a band out of Nashville called East Nashgrass, really great musicians playing with a bunch of different people, but as this configuration, East Nashgrass is really cool. So go ahead and check them out. All right, Unseen Branches asks, I'm learning 5-string after playing Irish tenor. What can you tell me about that move? The tuning is completely different number of strings. It's basically a different instrument, especially if you're playing with finger picks. Even if you're playing clawhammer, it's a totally different technique. So I wouldn't think that there actually would be any crossover whatsoever other than you're comfortable holding a banjo technically. But that sounds like it'll make for a fun switch and a good adventure. So enjoy. Good luck. Emil the Illustrator asks, best place to learn how to play Rainbow Connection? That's a good question. I don't know. Maybe Jim Pankey has a lesson on that. Let's find out. So if you search Jim Pankey Rainbow Connection, you will find this right here. Learn to play Rainbow Connection. My guess is that is the best place to learn it. If I was going to learn it, that's where I would go. All right. Wesley Corbett, certified banjo owner, Warhammer figurine painter, fellow cat owner, asks, why is it that oftentimes when I eat something, I drink something too? DNSPTZ asks, does your banjo have a name? No, none of my instruments have names, but that would actually, that'd be kind of fun. So if you have a name for this banjo, leave it in the comments, and maybe you would get to name the banjo. All right, another question. How long did it take for you to master the banjo? I've just started playing. Well, I'll let you know when I do master the banjo, but I've been playing for almost 11 years, so it's taken that long to get where I'm at now. But as far as I'm concerned, and I've talked to other people that have a lot more experience than I do, you can live that way your entire life, just waiting to get to that next level or to fully learn it or to master it. No matter how good you are, whatever that means, you can always feel like there's something else to learn, which can be frustrating, but it can also be really exciting because it's really fun to learn things. So I don't really worry about that too much. I just am kind of excited to learn more. So just enjoy the ride. Okay, and Brian asks, can you truly change your right hand technique after 20 years of bad form? Of course, you can change anything after any amount of time. It just might take a while to do it. If you're really committed to it, if you really care about it, if you work at it every single day, then yes, you can change anything. Okay, folks, and we are here at the very last question, which is, what is the best thing about the banjo? And that is actually the last question. That was the final question that was asked in this poll. And the best thing about the banjo is the way it sounds. I know, it's deep. You're welcome. So anyways, folks, thanks so much for watching. Thanks so much for asking your questions. Hopefully you found those answers satisfactory in one way or another. More videos coming out soon. So check out Patreon for all kinds of bonus content, support this channel, all of that. Like this video, subscribe to this channel, all of that's super helpful. But otherwise, that's going to do it with this video. So thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.